Good morning and welcome to everybody today for the Moves and Shakers virtual event. My name is Simon Montgomery and I am the Regional Directors for Moves and Shakers. Delighted to see so many people that are registered for today's event. It's great to see you all. For those of you who aren't familiar with Moves and Shakers, just a very, very quick introduction. Moves and Shakers is now in its 25th year of running. And we are the UK's leading property and networking forum, creating fantastic events, collaborating between private and public sectors, and as I say, putting forward tremendous events. As you all know and would have probably anticipated, we have postponed all our physical events until the autumn, which has meant to fill the void, we have created a programme of virtual events. If you have missed any of those virtual events or you're not aware of them, they can be viewed on our YouTube channel, which we have created. Please do subscribe to that. And indeed, today's event will be put onto that YouTube channel. So if indeed you want to forward the event to somebody else that you might think it's of value to, having seen today's event, please feel free to do so. Today's webinar, it's great. We have a really good accommodation. It's been marketed as a Northwest event, but obviously we have a mix of a national and we have a mix of the Northwest. I'll explain that in a little bit. So the actual title is the Northwest Marketplace, so public and private community collaboration post-lockdown. And we have a tremendous panel. Caroline Simpson, who's a corporate director of Place for Stockport Borough Council. Obviously, Caroline is very focused in the Northwest. We have Matt Crompton, who's a managing director of Muse. Matt, whilst he's based in the Northwest, he has a very much a national remit with his role, and as do Muse. As does Mark Garmon-Jones, who is the director of shopping centres for Savills. So again, Mark will obviously have a big national remit, and obviously you'll know the brand Savills has a geography that spreads far and wide. Today, our chair is Colette McCormack. Colette is the partner with Winckworth Sherwood. We will have a short keynote to kick things off before the panel session. Tom Whittington, who is the director of retail and leisure research, again at Savills. And again, that should set the foundation for lots of juicy topics that we're going to discuss this morning around about repurposing of town centres and the like, so it should be great. There is the opportunity to ask some questions, and if you go to the bottom of your screen, there is a question and answers tab. So Colette's going to try and incorporate some of those particular questions with a panel session. Obviously, if that fits in with the general sort of flow of the morning. But I think that is it for me. That's enough from me. So what I'm going to do, without further ado, I'm going to pass you on to Tom, whose short keynote and then following the keynote, it will go directly into the panel session. So over to you, Tom.
Thank you very much, Simon. So to set the scene, I thought I'd look at this through the lens of the work we've been doing at Savills on reimagining the retail market and how development success is often tied to how well public and private sector collaboration with one another and engage with the communities that they serve. So first things first, why do we need to reimagine retail? If you believed everything you read in the last few months, you'd think that retail's consumers and the high street have all changed for good. Have they really? It is easy to get caught in the headlights of the here and now. We need to keep things in perspective, avoid short-term sensationalism, and consider the long-term real future of retail, at least when looking at long-term development projects. What we are seeing now is the accelerated evolution of a number of key trends that we've been witnessing for some time. Trends that have gradually been reducing our need for retail, yes, but have we actually reached an impasse and nothing will ever be the same again? I don't think so, but I do think we may have moved forward 5 years in the advancement of some of these trends. Over the last decade, we've seen consumers' need for value, quality, and convenience and experience take precedence. There's no doubt we'll be seeing swathes move online, becoming more ethical, more health conscious, more thrifty, and yet more indulgent. You would think that we're all the same. We're not. In the post-COVID environment, let's not assume that all people will change the same, want the same, behave the same. Consumers are not about to leave shops and restaurants for good. But of course, no amount of optimism gets us away from the fact that our relationship with retail is changing and our need for retail is reducing. The declining need for space is by no means a new phenomenon. The number of retail outlets have been falling for decades. This trend is also set to continue, But not all retail places are affected in the same way. Looking at vacancy rates for different kinds of shopping centres shows regional and prime centres well below those in secondary and tertiary locations. But the problems are affecting all retail spaces. We're all in this together. The current situation will undoubtedly see these vacancies worsen in the short term. The void rate itself masks a more serious concern, void length. Even in the most successful retail places, there is an increasing proportion of vacant units that are empty for long periods or even permanently, shown here in pink. And this problem is exacerbated in most towns and cities across the country. It's not that they don't function as retail spaces, they simply have too much of it. The UK has 75 million square feet of vacant retail space. 40% of that space is long-term void and should be considered redundant. The UK is likely to become 25 to 40% overspace for retail in the next decade. The problem has been creeping up on us for a long time, and COVID or not, is reaching a critical moment in which we need to radically change our thinking of retail places and town centres. So what do we do with this excess space? Do we reposition it or repurpose it? Well, often the answer is both. But let's be clear, we're not saying that retail is dead. Boring retail is dead. There remains demand for new retail concepts that fit with evolved consumer preferences and additional space where demand has shifted to. Dynamic retail will survive and mixed-use retail spaces will thrive. Let's look at a few examples. Hatch Manchester is not exactly the repositioning of a retail pitch, but it is adjacent to a retail pitch with high voids and questionable quality. There's a lot to like about Hatch. The street food offer, the clever use of the existing urban fabric and using a motorway flyover to create covered public realm, the blend of F&B with incubator retail and office space and containers, not to mention an awesome cup of coffee. It's a great example of how there is still demand for retail developments in the shadow of declining retail spaces and how it is possible to curate a unique offer that appeals to consumers and builds community with lettings to local independent businesses. Food plays an important role in driving community and social value. These four examples take the food hall concept, which has too often been associated only with affluent and tourist locations, but can be beneficial in driving footfall in all sorts of weird and wonderful settings. The right offer in the right place brings with it engagement. Commune in Sheffield is a great example of repositioning marginalised retail space. The former Co-op department store had been empty for a decade and the streets around it in decline. North Point Developments put a food hall on the ground floor, flexible co-working space above, and it's been instrumental at driving footfall to the area and the subsequent revival of adjacent units that are now seeing a surge in occupational demand and regeneration opportunities. Repurposing is the opportunity to take failed retail space and adapt it to fulfill another local need. Stockport has struggled with high retail vacancy for decades, largely on the back of overdevelopment of out-of-town retail. And yet, the town has some great fundamentals and has seen a surge in investment in and around the town centre in recent years. In 2018, Marks and Spencer's closed its door as part of the overhaul of their national estate. This had the potential to leave a large 80,000 square foot blight on the high street, the current occupational market seeing little demand for a unit this fast. However, while Stockport is oversupplied for retail, it's undersupplied for offices. The developer Glenbrook has seized the opportunity to access significant floor plates in the heart of the town centre and repurpose it into a workspace environment. The new scheme, Stock, is anticipated to increase footfall, further diversifying the town centre offer. Instead of standing empty, shoppers will see the historic building remain an important part of the community. So how do you go about delivering something special? It's all about creating hybrid spaces. It's reimagining the real function of consumer ecosystems. It's not one size fits all, but most places have something they need. The clever bit is working out what that need is. Mixed uses benefit all uses, interlinking, creating footfall, operating different day parts, places that are more vibrant, have greater social value, are more sustainable, are more resilient. Financial viability can be a major hurdle, it's true, but public and private partnerships is one route to delivery that is helping get schemes off the ground. We're seeing an increasing number of joint ventures between landlords and specialist property developers, more developers working with local authorities, more local authorities becoming investor stakeholders of their own town centre assets, with over 800 million invested in shopping centres since 2016, and more desire to work with communities and build engagement with those the schemes will ultimately support. The importance of good stakeholder engagement is being seen in the current redevelopment of Birchley Green Shopping Centre in Hertford. The original proposed scheme was thought to lack vision and proved controversial with the local authority and its shoppers when the demolished development stalled and left locals without a town centre. Then, new owner Chase New Homes created a revised scheme that brought together mixed uses of a hotel, social housing, NHS Trust and Community Square. The council had been brought on board through social and civic provision, fulfilling the need for housing and employment, and having been convinced that the town centre needed real change. The original proposed scheme was thought to still have too much retail, and the revised scheme has seen the retail reduced to a third of the original proposals and has been 80% pre-let, which reinforces the point that repurposing retail is not about eliminating it, but right-sizing it and placing it alongside other complementary uses that meet the needs of all stakeholders. That's the end of my Whistle Stops tour. Many of these themes deserve far more scrutiny, but for now, I'll leave that to the panel. Thank you.
Thanks, Tom. That was a really interesting kind of canter through the issues around retail and repurposing our town centres. We've got a great panel today. All the people involved on the panel, I'm sure most of you know, but everybody's involved in delivering major regen schemes and working together in public-private partnership. The key to these being delivering new communities. I'm just going to ask each of you to start off with whether you could just give us just a brief insight really into how the lockdown, how quickly it came and how it affected your organisations and how you coped really. Some organisations seem to adapt quicker than others, but it'd be really interesting, for example, if you could start us off, Caroline, and just give us a brief overview, followed by Matt and then Mark, and then perhaps we can go into some more specific questions that I'd like to ask you, Caroline, around the Stockport Town Centre, which I'm sure everyone's interested in. And as Simon said, if people want to send through questions, then we will pick those up as we go along. Caroline.
Hi, good morning everybody. Thanks, Colette. So probably a little bit different to other members of the panel in our experience of the last 7 to 8 weeks, but as you can imagine, we've been right at the centre of some of the crisis response. So we've been dealing particularly on the health and social care, supporting our health partners and delivering social care right at the front line, dealing with all the things that you've been seeing on the news on a daily basis, PPE and testing scenarios and so on. But the second element of work, which has perhaps gone a little bit more unseen, but has been absolutely vital, is the vast humanitarian response that's happened up and down the country. I'm sure Stockport's no exception with the amount of resilience we've shown with our community and voluntary sector, supporting our vulnerable residents. Our workforce have been out shopping for residents and delivering medicines and basically, you know, doing things that putting the day job aside and basically all hands to the pump. But the third element of work that we've been focused on from day one has been the economy. So we've had an economic resilience forum across Stockport of business leaders, sector representatives meeting 3 times a week consistently for the last 7 to 8 weeks, thinking about not only the crisis response about economy, but our economic recovery plans. So they are absolutely vital to the future of Stockport as the future of the country. So, you know, I'll share a bit more as we go through the panel session. In terms of the impact on the organisation, well, financial resilience is the biggest one. We have had a massive loss of income, car park income, council tax receipts, business rate receipts, as well as a massive pressure on our spending as we've been responding to the crisis. What we're anticipating is some support from government, although indications are nowhere near enough to cover the financial hole we have in our budget this year and likely for years to come as well. And that will vary up and down the country, but I can't imagine there's one local authority that hasn't been hit severely financially.
Thanks, Caroline. Matt, do you want to give us an insight into kind of how Muse is adapting?
Yeah, sure. I can't quite believe that in October last year, it's our staff conference, I actually threw up on the slide Charles Darwin's quote about not the strongest of the species that survive, but the ones that are most ready to adapt. And that really was focused on us adapting from traditional markets into the markets that we just heard Tom talk about. What I didn't anticipate is a global pandemic that was going to make us adapt really quickly and really extensively. So we are 100% agile as a business, so I'm really pleased our team has adapted really well to these trying circumstances. We're all communicating. Health and wellbeing is featured more than once a week within our internal comms. So yeah, really chuffed with how all our colleagues across the country have adapted to that change. All of our operations, save for Scotland, are live. So all of our projects that should be on site are on site. And sort of groundworks and the like are proceeding at 100% capacity, but when we're trying to construct in closed confines, then clearly we're not able to. So I think on balance, we're probably 50 to 100% capacity at the minute in terms of our productivity. Personally, I'm missing the coffee machine catch-ups and the spur of the moment interactions that you probably take for granted sat in the workplace, and having to be proactive and catch people and contact people during the day to have bespoke conversations is trying, but I think we're all getting there. Our biggest challenge, I think, at the minute is how we're going to return to the workplace, especially in London, with virtually everybody relying on public transport to get to the office. So we've got bespoke plans for each office in terms of returning to the workplace. And then finally, really trying to forecast the post-COVID-19 landscape, quite frankly. As a business, we've been going 30 odd years, profitable every year, largely because we forecast quarterly in terms of on every project, all 33 live projects at the minute. We forecast 4 times a year. We've now forecast 3 times since February, just because the landscape seems to be moving quite rapidly. So trying to forecast the post-COVID-19 landscape is probably our biggest challenge at the minute.
Yeah, not surprising, Matt. But yeah, I before we go on to Mark, and you can give us your view again from Savills' point of view. I think that's certainly something 6-7 weeks in, people are saying, actually, it's the human contact. We're all kind of people persons in all the the jobs that we do as a planning lawyer and yourselves in terms of community engagement, and you only, I suppose, you take it for granted and then you miss it when we don't have it. But Mark, any kind of insights into your organisation and how you're coping as an organisation, bearing in mind the challenges we're all facing?
Yeah, I mean, I have to say, I'm sort of super proud of the business. I've been here 25 years and seen it adapt and change. And we're obviously now a global business. And I think we've been very fortunate to see the lessons from Asia and the experiences and coming out of lockdown there have been really valuable lessons that we've been able to feed to our UK clients and our European clients. And I think we were very lucky that the ability to work remotely was a very easy one. We had great IT infrastructure, so the business had invested in that. And it's been, like I say, a seamless transition to allow us to service our clients. We've been putting some agile working plans into place. But what we really found, importantly, and Tom is part of this team on the research side, is clients really wanted data. They wanted research. They want points of and sort of thought leadership in terms of what we were seeing around the world and how that would impact them and their assets. So yeah, I agree with Matt that the opening of the offices will be the next challenge for us and for others in terms of how many people you can get in a lift and all of that. But opening the retail and town centre locations, again, will be a major challenge. We've seen restrictions of sub only shopping centres below 400,000 square foot or a certain size opening across Europe. Whether that comes in here is yet to be clear, but I certainly think there's some challenges in terms of the dial really turns up in terms of opening fully again.
No, I think there's a clear theme there, isn't there, between everybody in terms of the resilience of each of the organisations and of the workforce itself, and how do we adapt going forward. I know certainly as planning lawyers, you know, some of the big issues we had were around you know, how do we do statutory consultation and public consultation, and how do we validate planning applications? And we've had some help from government in terms of the regs recently, but you know, a lot of it has been, as you quite say, looking at what we've done in the past and looking at kind of trying to find solutions through. Caroline, I just want to come to you because I think a lot of people would be interested in this. Just wouldn't mind kind of you giving us an update on Stockport and the Stockport town centre issues. I mean, Tom touched on the issues that some raised there, and also there's been a few questions this morning on the live feed saying, you know, do you think councils will get the funds that they now need to deliver their city centres? You know, a lot of the city centres that we're talking about were in need of, you know, repurposing and regenerating. So, you know, if you could give us an update on where you are on Stockport Town Centre, and in particular in terms of whether you think funding will be affected going forward.
Yes, Colette. So we remain absolutely kind of foot on the gas really in terms of our town centre development, our regeneration plans. We've kept working through the crisis in terms of scheme development, and what has been really encouraging actually is investors and developers have also continued to progress schemes. And you know, I think we know that we're in a long-term business. We have to think long-term. That is absolutely part of what we do. And I'm absolutely not understating nor underestimating the scale of the challenge in forecasting some of that long-term future at the moment. But Tom's presentation, you know, still remains absolutely valid in terms of the importance of creating places where consumers are going to want to come and spend their time, spend their energy and spend their money. I think there is a very obvious short-term issue, and I mean short-term over the next 12 months, about how do we not only support the regeneration and development work that is so vital that continues in the background, but as importantly, we support consumer confidence now for the hospitality industry, the retail industry that starts to come to life as lockdown eases. And how do we create the kind of safe spaces where people can come? And you know, certainly from a Stockport point of view, we are giving that an awful lot of thought at the moment about how can we make our town centre safe with one-way systems, animated queuing systems. If that is going to be a feature of our life for the next 12 months, then let's start to think about it and start to think about how we can create features out of necessity, innovate with some of our partners, and you know, create places and spaces where people can come safely, they can feel safe when they come, and that then creates the consumer confidence that is going to drive our local economy. So we protect what we have and what we've built so far, and then of course in the background we're progressing the next stage of development. And as I say, we are progressing with pretty much every scheme at the moment in some form or another. And in fact, this morning, we are making an announcement with partners, Capital and Centric, who are coming forward and investing, and have just bought Weir Mill over the last 24 hours from Maryland Security, an absolutely vital part of our regeneration plans with the Mayoral Development Corporation, a scheme that's been in the development for 20 years and has been stalled. We now believe we have a brilliant partner we can work with that's got the same level as ambition, and we're going to drive that project forward, backed by Homes England and so on. So we've got confidence, we've got momentum, we've got to keep that, and the council has funded that acquisition, so we're financing that acquisition, which is an indication that we are still moving forward. But I think the reality is we will be far more selective in terms of the level of financial support and risk sharing that local authorities can take in the future. But we are absolutely still foot on the gas.
Well, that's really good to hear, actually, and I suppose you heard it here first, folks, with Caroline's announcement. I suppose just turning to you next, Matt, in terms of, because obviously, you know, Muse, you know, have a fantastic reputation in the marketplace about, you know, delivering and regen schemes. So I suppose it'd be interesting to see how, I mean, and one of the things that's key, I think, and I think will be key as we move forward post-COVID, I suppose, is public realm and public open space and how we deliver that and how it's managed. But from your perspective, in terms of your experience, in terms of the, you know, the schemes that you do, you know, how do you see, do you still see the town centres having a major place to play in terms of the major regeneration of areas?
Potentially, and I guess it depends on lots of things, but crucially the appetite of the councils themselves. Caroline's already said and expressed why Stockport is doing as well as it is. So having committed partners, public sector partners, will be crucial to this, as well as having just the general underlying economic dynamics. Tom's stolen quite a lot of my thunder. Town centres are changed forever. COVID-19 has just accelerated what online retailing had started. So I think we're all having to adapt and respond that much quicker. But I guess that therein lies the opportunity. So, you know, backfilling with quality, either residential, offices, public facilities. I know Caroline's putting some more public facilities back into Mersey, and green spaces. You know, green spaces are key. It's a great opportunity to get rid of those sort of overdense concrete monstrosities that we've had and create places that people really do want to be in, and not just to shop, but to actually, you know, mix with other people and the like. So from that perspective, I guess towns that have grown more incrementally over time will be less difficult to reimagine. So where towns have expanded, you know, as and when new retailing concepts have happened, I think it'll be challenging, but it'll be a lot less challenging, let's say, than trying to reimagine a monolithic shopping centre that's been plonked, you know, incongruously in the middle of a town centre. I mean, how on earth do you then start to break that up and make it much more attractive to the general public? But crucially, we mustn't let transportation wither on the vine. You know, if town centres are getting less people into them, there might be a temptation to start cutting back on transport services into those town centres and just presume everybody's going to shop online, and therefore they don't need buses and trains and taxi ranks and the like. So I know Stockport isn't doing that, but, you know, it is about quality backfilling. It's about green spaces, but crucially, let's not make the transport facilities wither, because if they go, then people aren't going to be able to get in and out. So
yeah, that's a really,
lots of things to focus on.
Yeah, and that's a really important point to make, actually, Matt, about the transport, not least because it'll have its own challenges around funding and getting people the confidence to get people back out there on the trams and the buses, etc. Just turning to yourself, Mark, in terms of, you know, Tom's keynote was really interested in talking about, you know, kind of how the virus just accelerated what you know was the trends that were already there. How do you see kind of retail and leisure moving forward?
Transformational acceleration is probably how I put it. I mean, I think acceleration is a word I've used a lot. I think the changes that we could have seen happening over the next 3 years are frankly going to happen over the next 6 to 12 months. As I say, that pace is extraordinary. And I think what the lockdown has showed is that online can't do everything. And that for many people, essential and local retailing, there is a real physical need for it. But I am afraid that some of the sort of injured sort of retailer and leisure players and operators will not survive the lockdown period and the coming months, and we will see a reduction in rent collections the next quarter. But we will see some new phoenixes coming out of those better formats and better run businesses. But I think the interesting element in many is the consumer's thoughts on experience, relevance, treating themselves, and shopping patterns is likely to be changed forever. I mean, for councils, the good news is that people are thinking local. I think this crisis has created and reignited in many towns that might have been lacking or waning that sense of community, and the residents are keen to support their community as best they can, and that's hopefully good news for independents and entrepreneurs that derive a load of services within that. I mean, the supermarkets, it's been like Christmas every week for them in many respects, but it's at a heavy cost. They've had to invest heavily in the businesses. So I think there's we've had in the last few weeks over 15 requests for sort of repurposing strategic reviews for various clients, and I think a lot of people are focused. We've always been very strong in our thoughts about community and convenience, and maybe it's just rebranded these days to essential and food, but those themes are holding up as much as possible. But every town and every centre is different.
Yeah, and I suppose important points there about kind of, which Matt picked up on as well, about opportunities as well. It's important to kind of, look for the opportunities and support those. Matt, if I could just come back to you, just because I know you've got a national, I know this is the Northwest, but I know you've got a national remit with Muse. Even though you're based here in the Northwest, not unlike myself. But I suppose what I'd be interested to know is that you've got a very good reputation for doing JVs with local authorities. Do you see a difference in kind of going forward in terms of kind of the Northwest and other regions, I suppose in particular London? And are you already starting to look at, post COVID-19, whether you would have a different investment strategy in terms of certain regions in investing more in as a result of this?
I think comparing London with the regions is always going to be quite tricky. Zone 1 London is a different world, but it's also got seismic challenges at the minute in terms of getting people to and from the city in the West End. Our office is in the West End in Soho Square, and the dynamic of our people getting in and out of the office, and the concerns they've got about how quick we may or may not be able to get them back into the workplace. That's one snapshot of what everybody must be thinking about down there. But if you get out of Zone 1, let's assume that's Zone 1, and you get out into the sort of Zone 2 and outward towns, the picture isn't that much different. High streets are, withering, being repurposed, looking for some sort of viability challenge, whether that's future high street fund, which I think lots of people are waiting to see, who's getting the funding and how much is it, and is it going to be available. There's a new towns fund being launched, but to think that London is any different, outside Zone 1 is any different from provincial towns, it isn't. So wherever we are, 33 projects up and down the country, Aberdeen down to Plymouth, they're all struggling to render projects viable, but they've all got the same challenges, but equally they've all got the same opportunities, I guess. And those that will be less difficult to reimagine will be the ones where you have got a strong council, you have got a procurement process that resulted in a flexible partnership agreement to allow both public and private sector partners to flex with changes in economic cycles, changes in governments, and the like. And if you've got open, honest champions on both sides of the fence, then you've got more chance of making real changes. But yeah, London's a different world. London's own one's a different world, but everywhere else there's real challenges. Odd exceptions. Bristol, we've got a stunning scheme with interesting a box park as well. At Wapping Wharf, they're flying out the door. Salford, just our town-to-town house scheme there, they're flying out the door. But generally speaking, it's a struggle everywhere.
Yeah, and I'm just conscious of the time because we're rolling up to the time, and you know, as a planning lawyer, I'd feel a bit remiss by not asking you a question on planning. So I'm going to turn to you first, Caroline, because as I say, I know from my local authority clients and also our private developer clients and JV clients that, you know, we had a lot of issues when the lockdown came in, because some schemes we were halfway through consultation. How do you finish consultation in a lockdown? We had all those issues. The councils had to look at their statement of community involvement and SIL policies, etc. Have you found that planning to be a barrier? And is there anything that in your experience that would help? Bearing in mind that people normally say one of the barriers to delivery is planning.
So immediately after this, we're taking some planning decisions under new delegations that we put in place within the first week of the crisis, just to basically keep the planning system moving. We've continued to validate, process, and make decisions on planning applications right throughout. There is a challenge about public engagement. You know, there's an integrity, isn't there, to the planning process, which is all about that public engagement, public consultation, and public participation in planning meetings is really vital, and has always been absolutely part of the fabric in Stockport. So it's been something that we've been having to balance very carefully, and we will be doing more strategic applications through live planning meetings next month. But it is a challenge, because it is that getting that balance between keeping the authenticity of a planning process, but actually keeping it moving as well. So, you know, hopefully from a Stockport point of view, we've been doing all of that. Workforce have been fantastic. There is obviously a question now about where do we go with planning policy, and are there further work we can do as a planning system to support on the economic recovery side, and that's something that we're looking at as well.
And Matt, any comments?
Our experience is quite patchy. We've got some authorities that get it, and we've had our first online consultation down on a big scheme in Dartford that went really well. I doubt whether if we'd have opened up a communication in the local town centre, would have got many more interested parties online, you know, asking the right questions. So yeah, we've had our first online consultation. It went really well. I don't know what the outcome's going to be, but it seemed to go pretty well. And yeah, in terms of responses from planning authorities, yeah, we haven't seen much change. Those that weren't very good at responding, either because they were understaffed or politically very tense, have stayed that way, and others that have been proactive and have some sort of stability around them have also been, you know, very proactive. So it's been, everybody's really mucked in, real Dunkirk spirit around the place.
Great stuff. And Mark, have you know, your experience or your firm's experience?
Yeah, our planning guys, I mean, I think ultimately most planning policies are incredibly supportive of town centres at a strategic level, but given in some cases the competing interests located within them, it can obviously offer a bit of restriction in terms of competing interests. I think if we're going to see this real change to help town centre regenerations, there needs to be a bit of a radical approach and change to some of the framework, you know, setting, you know, perhaps more minimum densities for residential and commercial development in terms of taking perhaps a more pragmatic approach to car parking, and looking at different land uses, of removing policies about protecting retail frontages and heritage buildings and the like. All of these are important changes to look forward rather than backwards, and I think that's critical, that change comes in, you know, fleet of foot councils clearly, like Stockport's, you know, that is what is need to be had across the country.
Yeah, no, I absolutely agree, and I think the message is I think, Matt, you know, our experience is the same as yours, that, you know, the councils that have always been good at keeping things going have managed to do that, because where there's a will, there's a way. I'm not saying that the challenges aren't difficult, you know, particularly Caroline, you know, we've struggled with, you know, community and consultation as well, but there's usually kind of a pragmatic, proportionate way to kind of do things and include people and keep things going. I'm going to hand back to Simon now. It's been, I think it's been really interesting hearing all the different viewpoints. It's, you know, the great thing about the kind of panel that and the schemes that you're working on is that it is this public-private, and I think we'll still probably need even more of the public-private to kind of keep things going, and we'll still need that commitment from councils like Stockport, Caroline, to, you know, continue going into innovative JVs to try and bring things forward, and we need the planning system to move agilely and support that as well. But, you know, great, there's certainly a feeling of community spirit and wanting to keep doing things. Simon, can I hand to you?
I'm coming back in. Can you hear me?
Yes.
All right, great. Well, that's been fascinating. Obviously, thank you very much to everybody. It's there's a lot to cover there, and I think with that conversation probably could have gone on for another hour or so, couldn't it? And some, there's so much to touch on. But I think as a general overview, I think the common themes coming out of a general, because obviously the theme of the morning was private and public collaboration and moving forward. You know, how's that going to look like? How's it going to feel to make sure everyone's as successful as we all possibly can be moving forward? And the general themes for me coming out of that were, what I've written down, sort of working together. So the collaboration now becomes, if it wasn't important before, which obviously it was, it's become even more important. I know it's, you know, there are certain sort of people in the marketplace who go to, I know Sherwood when he was at Homes England, he sort of where a lot of Homes England went to is where councils were open for business, and I think that's where when you see the heat map of developments that Homes England are involved in, and that was a general feedback when Sherwood was there, and I think that's going to be absolutely critical now moving forward. And having fleet of foot was mentioned a few times. I like that expression, but I think it's really relevant, because actually moving forward now. So we look at Matt, you know, sort of, I think you've done in the last couple of months, you've done three different appraisals on one of your businesses that we normally do one quarterly, and I think that's just what, you know, it's a good example, but it's one example of probably across the whole marketplace where people are having to constantly dissect what they're doing and look at the numbers and look at the facts, and I think that's going to happen in many different ways, not just in sort of facts and figures and balance sheets. So I think the general message is we're stronger together. I don't want to start sounding like Boris, but I think we are stronger together. But incorporate that with fleet of foot, and I think that probably sounds like the way forward. Although it's hard to predict the way forward, I'm sure. Our next event is the 21st of May, which is Mark Farmer, who is the founding director and CEO of Cast Consultancy. And Mark is a wonderful public speaker. He's a very, very big authority in the marketplace, and he's giving a market overview, and a new paradigm is the title for that. So it's a construction market overview, a new paradigm, and that should be absolutely fascinating.